And I think that's why I find performing so cathartic, is because it's one of the only times in my life I lean on people. I say, listen to me. Like, I need to let go of this, and I give it to you, and then you have to take care of it.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are so excited to talk about art, creativity, and magic with Nika Danilova, aka Zola Jesus. Nika is a classically trained opera singer, musician, producer, artist, and practitioner of magic, and in the last decade, she's released 5 albums with a unique, powerful voice and composition. And a few years ago, Nika moved back onto family land in Wisconsin, and she built a cabin in the woods. Nika exudes sincerity and dedication, and she has incredibly important things to say. She is the perfect person to ask about creativity, art, and vision. For example, what does it mean to be an artist, especially in this age of ever-increasing digital connection? What does it even mean to be human? And what is perfection? And is that a hindrance to creation itself? So Nika talks about all of these topics, and she also shares about her sonic diary of music during COVID-19 and her new projects to connect artists and creators. Nika also shares about growing up in nature, battling materialistic reductionism, the vulnerability of being an artist, and also Nika shares how we can all resist treating art as a commodity and instead engage in things like the active imagination and how to use that for artistic purposes. Nika also talks about how being an artist changed for her during COVID-19, her direct listener support through Patreon, and Nika also answers your awesome Glitch Bottle Patreon listener questions. And also a big shout out to Witch, Open Sorceress, and previous podcast guest Meredith Graves, who first introduced me to the power of Nika's music. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Nika Danilova. Nika Danilova, thank you so much for just taking the time and stopping by the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I really appreciated Meredith sharing about your music, because I just got this immediate sense of here's someone who is an actual artist who has things to say and communicate that visually and also through music. And so you live in a nature-infused area, and there are so many listeners that might not live in deep nature. Can you just share about your early background and how did this have an effect on you?
Yeah, so I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, but I only lived there for a year. My parents were both from Wisconsin, so they wanted to move back home to raise us near family, since I come from a big family. I was raised in Wisconsin, in northern, north central Wisconsin, and pretty early on, my life was, nature was a huge part of my daily life. It was my entertainment, my recreation, it was the background to everything. I grew up on 150 acres of forest where I live now. So the feeling of being in nature just feels like home, because that's what it is to me. And maybe specifically these woods that I return to, but in general, anywhere that I've been, I feel like if I'm not in a place that feels uninhabited by humans, or if there isn't a place like that around, I need to get to it. That's what I'm trying to say. I need to get to that place. I used to live in Los Angeles and Seattle, and it was just really claustrophobic for me. I couldn't really put my finger on why until I came back to the woods and realized that this is where I feel just at my base level, at peace, holistically.
To that point, can you share a little bit about how many years has your family been on that land? And then can you share a little bit about also you have obviously very strong connections to Europe as well, and specific areas. I think people would find that pretty fascinating and really cool. Can you share about that?
Yeah, well, the land that I live on now has been in my family only for about 25 years, but prior to that, my mom grew up on farms, and my dad grew up in like North Dakota. So he has a strong identity with the North Dakota plains. But from there, his whole family comes from Ukraine, and they were Ukrainian German farmers. And that was just a huge part of my cultural identity. Like, it's American, but at the same time, I feel like it's tinged with this peasantness. It's like this sort of steppe farmer ancestry. So it's a big part of my DNA, and especially when I go over to visit in Eastern Europe particularly, I just feel it looks and smells and feels everything just like how I grew up, and the foods. And so that's how I was able to connect with my ancestry and really acknowledge the lineage that I come from, and I try to pay respect to that. My ancestors are actually a huge part of my like inner life, just like trying to relate to them and kind of trying to like make them proud and understand them better, because by understanding them, I understand myself better and the story that I'm a part of. And I want to just play my part in this long lineage, and just contribute to that story in good faith. And yeah.
I think you were just tweeting recently, too, about how you say, I miss my old job of being that weird, tiny American stumbling around Eastern European towns searching for dumplings, which I thought was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I miss that feel. I miss being on tour and just stumbling around these little towns and trying to find flavors that remind me of home and remind me of, I don't know, I love dumplings too, so.
Hashtag dumplings forever. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Was there like a concrete point in time when you said to yourself, okay, there's something more to nature, however amazing and beautiful it is, it's kind of like the fingerprints of something bigger, something perhaps esoteric, something more like energy infused? Like, was there ever like a single moment for that, or was it just kind of growing up that way? You just kind of had this sense of something more, or can you just share about that a little bit?
I've definitely been growing up in nature. It just taught me to respect it, because my dad's like an outdoorsy guy, he cuts wood and he hunts and he processes his own deers, you know what I mean? And so that just the whole, again, like that holistic cycle of participating in the natural world was always dealt with care and honesty. And it was just a part of growing up, was just that respect for maybe a more natural way of doing things that isn't just going to the store and buying your meat. Or, my mom was always a huge gardener. And there was just this aspect constantly in my life of just, that I'm a part of this thing. It's not like I'm separate from it. And so I didn't really recognize that as a child, but I dreamed of living in New York City and going to Juilliard and being an opera singer in the big city and traveling around the world, which isn't so far from the truth, but a little less glamorous. But I wanted to move to New York and live this big city life, but then once I got old enough to move away, and I went to LA and I went to Seattle and I went to the big, some big cities and traveled the world. And I just felt very alienated from that feeling of that simple, sort of pure existence of just living off the land. And it wasn't until I made the decision to come home that it really resonated with me, and I was able to connect with my woods in like a more profound way that I anticipated, really, because I wasn't really, I can get into this later too, or I don't know how much it matters, but I didn't start really understanding the magic in everything, and for lack of a better term, until recently, because I was kind of in this very, you're in your 20s and you're just like, okay, gotta like participate in society, gotta like, science rules, and if you put blinders on seeing the world, because like for me, I wanted to control all variables. And so magic or the esoteric was extremely seductive to me my entire life, but it wasn't until recently that I was able to really open up and let it in or let it out. And that's been super powerful, really powerful experience. It really just had to do with my own growth and awakening and the reconnection of moving back here and really digging into like what it means to be a part of this earth, Okay,
so this is like rabbit hole number 3 that we're going to go down, because I think it's awesome and just kind of shows how badass it is. But I'm curious if you agree with this, because like my observation on this is I totally agree with, scientific discovery, scientific laws of the universe, Newtonian physics, quantum physics, all of that stuff is amazing, but all of that stuff is only one small monocle, one small lens that is looking through a materialistic topography. And there's this outside of that monocle, there's like an entire other world, an entire other universe of, instead of being governed by the laws of physics, it's governed by the laws of meaning and engagement with spiritual entities or engagement with ancestors that like physics and science can't touch. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what do you think about that whole thing in terms of science versus esotericism? And did you also kind of find something like that, or just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been part of my journey, is just reckoning with my inner pursuit for truth, and then just finding, testing what truth really is, and I think we live in a society, but we currently live in these ages where we prioritize materialism in the materialist world, and we prioritize empiricism, and it's very humanist, human leading, meaning, we're the center of our world and everything is periphery. And that really divorces us from feeling a connectivity to all things. So we're just kind of put in this beautiful little box that limits the ways in which we're able to consider or think about existence or meaning or answer those questions that usually religion served. But now we live in such a secular world where religion is almost looked down upon as something like we've evolved past religion, but whatever you want to call it, religion and all things and magic and whatever, it lives underneath this umbrella of, I guess you say, spirituality, which I think it's lost its meaning to New Age and like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I feel like that whole paradigm, it's like it's so divorced from just normal, what we're expected to believe in these days, especially with like the emphasis put on STEM and, technology, and you feel kind of like old world to bring up, oh, but what does it mean? What is a soul? When we're talking about AI, everyone wants artificial intelligence and machine learning to replace humans without recognizing the soul, because we don't really have a soul in this contemporary world. We're just these bodies. And I don't know, there's a part of me that really believes that, because I'm like, okay, well, what do I see? What's real? I like to reduce everything. Like I'm but an animal, but I do feel like an animal feels something that it doesn't know either. You know what I mean? And I think there's so much that we feel that we just can't know unless we are able to accept the unknowns of what it means to be alive. And that's just so hard for us. For some reason, we can't handle unknowns. And so we try to give answers and names to everything. And by doing that, we're reducing everything into these boxes that can't hold the potential for what these things could mean. Or it's like experiencing the world with reduced amount of senses, and there's just so much potential to experience life and existence and the profundity of being here and participating in this journey together. There's so much more that just can't be proven, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not real. It just means it's not something that can give us a concrete answer. And we really, sorry, not to be on this whole pedestal, but I feel like we really need to find a way to reconnect with that essential nature of being simply alive. And it's beautiful and glorious. It doesn't have to look like religion. It doesn't have to look like magic. It doesn't have to look like anything. Those are just systems in order to contain or access this feeling. But that feeling exists just as much as our bodies and the cells within them and the atoms and matter and quantum matter,
You bring up such an amazing point about unnaming things, about that kind of resisting that urge, which is, I think, in this kind of society, this kind of global materialistic focused society, there's this direct urge to kind of name things. And to quote one of my favorite poets, Wallace Stevens, he has a couple of couplets there where he says, "Throw away the lights and the definitions and say of what you see in the dark that it is this or that it is that, but do not use the rotted names." And I think, like, I guess the question for an artist, for someone like you, is when you decide to create a piece of music, or if you kind of have this desire or this feeling like, okay, this is going to create, whether it arises organically or whether you think about it far in advance, when you are doing that, when you're creating something, do you have to resist an urge to kind of give into this, what some literary scholars call like this anxiety of influence? Like, okay, I'm doing this piece of music, it's kind of like this, or it's like, do you have to resist the urge to name things and kind of box things up? Or when you create, is it just kind of more of just a very, organic kind of process?
No, it doesn't. If it, this is hard. It's a hard part of my life as an artist, is fighting that desire to name things and to understand things, especially because I have the type of personality that is, I'm like a classically trained musician, which means I really, in my early days of making music, I prioritized technique, meaning that there's a binary there. There's like a right or wrong. And so that I've been fighting against that instinct as a creative person my entire musical and artistic journey. Is when I'm going to write a song, I feel like I'm drawing from, sometimes it can feel like a paint by numbers, because you're just like, wow, okay, all that I have to work with is all that I know, but all that I know, I already know, and so trying to find those unknowns by using what you know is the key, but not allowing yourself to be boxed in by using the tools that you have. Very easily, those tools can write the song for you, or your influence can write the song for you, but what I find to be truly rewarding art comes from when I can reach for tools as a means of approximating what I'm going for, but I'm not letting the tools define what I'm making. And yeah, it can just be very, very hard, because especially this day and age in the world of art as commodity, statistically, it feels easier to make something that can be commodified, and in some ways, and also just like logistically easier to be like, oh, I'm a craftsperson, but I'm going to, I'm just making shoes or whatever. I'm just making spoons, and I can feel like that with music as well. Like, I'm just going to churn out songs, but that isn't fulfilling for me at all, is treating it as a commodity. I really it needs to feel rewarding, but at the same time, I like having frameworks that I can kind of bust open. So I find myself sometimes leaning on frameworks, but I don't want to. So, I'm trying to catch myself. I don't know if that makes sense. It's pretty abstract, but it's a creative issue that I have a lot as just like a contemporary artist.
We do, Nika, have a listener question from Marissa, who is saying, we live in a digital age of memes and the constant borrowing of ideas. And so Marissa's asking, for you as an artist, where is the line between borrowing something or using something as an inspiration, as you said, Nika, to then kind of create your own unique piece?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've tried to recognize, because I want to catch that in myself. I don't want to imitate anything that's already been done. But if you can recontextualize it, I think that there's a place there. But it's hard, because I have some feelings about sample culture and how the sort of rapid and hyper recontextualization of past creations, it's going to kind of hit a wall at some point, because if nobody's making anything new to recontextualize, are we going to be sampling the sample of a sampled song that was sampled by, you know what I mean? Like, we're sampling a sample. We're making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And there's something there that I think, just as man is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, like, that will evolve our artistic spirit eventually. But I do feel like maybe the tools that are being handed to us, or the lack of tools that are being handed to us, are forcing us to have to make music in a way that doesn't necessarily take full advantage of our potential for creativity. You know what I mean? And that's something that feels very stressful as a contemporary musician, is feeling like I have so much more potential in me to make something so much better than this, but the resources are just so inconceivable that it would take to make that happen, that you have to just, everything is about compromise to the point where you just kind of feel like you're painting by numbers. And that can suck. That can feel really shitty. Yeah. But, you just work through it. And for me, I'm sort of fixated on this. I'm fixated on not painting by numbers. I'm fixated on trying to break through that and finding the resources that I need to make my vision a reality and then some. We have enough tools at our disposal to make okay art, but the tools are only so generative, and I feel like they're forcing us into a pathway that will inevitably end in homogeny.
In this digital culture, Nika, what are your thoughts about, and this is another listener question from Marissa, about the relationship that artists have with audiences, because everything's so digitally connected now? So Marissa's asking, for example, have you ever been writing a piece of music when you might read or hear comments that affect your creative process? Do you find your relationship with listeners and fans helpful or harmful in this regard?
I'm really sensitive, so yeah, that has affected me. It affected me, especially early on. I was super young when I got started. I was only like 20, 21 when Zola Jesus started taking off. And I was so young, and, this is what I wanted my whole little life, was to be a professional musician. So I was ready to do whatever I needed, now that sounds shitty, but back then I was like, I'll get in the van, I'll sleep on the couches. It's not like I'll sleep with the couch, I will sleep on the couch. At some point, there was so much criticism and so much confusion. Like, the feedback I was getting was so confusing because it was constantly contradicting itself. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people thought it was like this, some people thought it was too poppy, some people thought it was too weird. And I'm such a sensitive person that I took all that in, and I didn't have the tools to deal with that in a healthy way because my brain wasn't still fully formed, So I was pretty stressed about, well, what do I want? Where's the space for that? Where's the space for what I want out of this? Everyone's telling me what they want out of this. Some people love what I'm doing, but they want more of this type of song. Some people hate what I'm doing. They want more of this type of album. And there's not a lot of space for me to make a decision about, well, what's the statement that I want to make? And I think just having so much access to feedback, it's really damaging artists really early on. It's really making them self-conscious and hyper self-aware of their output and their work in a way that I don't think is inevitably super helpful. It can be quite damaging. I mean, the good feedback is encouraging, but no one cares about the good feedback. We all want to be told that what we're doing is shit so we can make it better. But at least in my self-critical mindset, I'm like, I don't care if you liked that. Tell me something you didn't like. I just want to be torn down. And so we seek that out, and then it becomes this horrible feedback loop of self-hatred and not trusting yourself and feeling like other people know better what you should be doing. People will say, oh, this artist is like a better Zola Jesus. Like, she's doing what Zola Jesus does, but better or something. And then I'm just like, what? Like, I'm just out here doing me. And then you're telling me somebody else is doing me better, or that I'm doing somebody else better. Like, that stuff is so insanely damaging. And for someone like me, I'm just some weird like goth girl making like sad music. If I have to deal with that, I can't imagine what Beyonce has to deal with, or any of these pop stars. That took me for a loop, and I had to do a lot of inner work to just try to, and I'm still doing that. I'm still going, well, what do I want? What am I looking for? Because everyone's telling me that what they want, but I need to find what I want. And I have to double down just to listen to the person inside me. I'm here for me, above all. And I do this because it feeds me, but I can't feed everybody and then feed myself last. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? It's a struggle. It's a struggle for probably a lot of contemporary artists, just dealing with feeling like, okay, well, I have a lot to say and I have a lot of ideas, but like, looks like people want this. So I don't know, should I do that? Like, I want to do this, but and it's so competitive and chaotic and confusing, and there's not a lot of help or resources. You're just on your own, and it's kind of sink or swim at some point. And so you just got to be really hardy. So I guess if I've learned anything through the past 10 years of my little musical career, it's been to just get hardy, stay hardy, and stay close to the chest, close to who you are, and to stay humble and not to be easily convinced that you're doing something wrong. You've got to really have a strong sort of unwavering integrity in that way.
To that point as well, Nika, is there like a battling of this kind of figure of perfection? Like, what is perfection? Again, we have a listener question from Marissa who says, as an artist, I like hearing what other artists think about their past work. So do you, Nika, do you dwell on whether or not you could have done a piece better, a certain piece of music, or do you publish and say, hey, here's what it is, here's what I've got? Like, do you ever decide that something is truly done, or are you constantly revisiting things?
Whew, yeah, that's the mind killer right there. Is that process of, I've talked to other musicians and they're not as hard on themselves as I am. I'm really hard on myself. So I'm just hearing the flaws, or usually what I'm hearing is what I could have done if I had more time or more resources. I'm like, oh, I wanted a choir there, but instead there's like this cheesy synth choir sound and it sucks. And, when it's discordant, there's like this cognitive dissonance in my head when I listen to my old work about like what I wanted and then what I got. But I think that's just a part of, again, the whole process of being somebody that makes something. You're constantly evolving and growing. And if you're any good at what you do, you're never as good as you'll ever be. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a good artist, you will never be good enough, because there is this feeling of ascension. Everything you make, everything that I make feels like I'm participating in this debt collection. I'm trying to just unload the debt that I feel like I have in my life and ascend and get closer to something that feels like the ultimate peace, the ultimate where I can finally pay off that last debt and go, all right, I did it. I'm done. Like, no looking back now. I think that's just a part of it, is just hating yourself most of the time, or hating what you do. And, sometimes I just feel like I'm a conduit. When I'm really doing it well, I feel like a conduit. And at times when that happens, I let it flow. I do the best I can. I make sure that I have my tools, my skills, everything is sharp, and I let it flow. And that's all I can be accountable for, is just channeling that into where it is and feeling like I did it honestly and I did it as best as I could. But it's always when you're trying to go for something and it doesn't feel right, and I don't know, it's at the end of the day, it just has to have that feeling, like it has the energy. You either capture something in the song or you don't. And really at the end, that's what it's all about.
When you experience those emotions, all of the things that you were talking about, like as an artist, how do you translate that into music? And I get like asking about like, how does the creative process work is almost an impossible like thing that you can't actually English, like you can't actually vocalize. But like when you experience those things, do you make a conscious effort of like, okay, I'm experiencing this, I'm going to turn this consciously into a piece of music? Or is it much more subconscious where it's marinating in you for a while? Like what do you do when you get these emotions, these feelings, these things that you want to say? I mean, how do you do that?
I struggle with every part of the process, so none of these answers will come easily for me. But I struggle with that because the aspect that I struggle with is the voice, and how the voice is my instrument. The most cathartic thing I can do is to go out into the woods and just howl. Like, I could howl for hours. It feels so good. But the problem with songwriting is that it's not just the howl. You have to describe the howl. You have to explain the howl. Why is the howl happening? You have to set everything up to be able to create context for that howl. And so that is the hardest part for me. When I have a feeling, that's actually one thing that I struggle with Zola Jesus, because it is, there's songs, there's a chorus, there's, I like that framework. That was the framework I'm talking about, that structure, the kind of the pop ballad structure. I like that. But sometimes it feels so limiting, because when I'm really feeling something, the music and the sound, the expression is too intangible to write. It is too intangible to adequately compose. And so that's why I've been interested in these days in doing, I don't want to say improvised performances, but to just have things be more free-flowing and open and interpretive and on the spot, constantly changing. I feel like that feels so much more magical to me, to encapsulate and to be the vehicle for something that is as intangible as a feeling. And sometimes I find it hard to try to bring it down into earth and give it a name and give it words and describe it and, have there be a catchy chorus that can really sum everything up. Like, to me, a pop song is the greatest work of craftsmanship, because you are taking that primal feeling and you are really getting into the nuts and bolts to try to recreate that to anybody who listens to it. Whereas sometimes there's also the other type, where I would say is more like jazz or something, where the feeling just flows and it's as intangible as the feeling itself. The music becomes as intangible as the feeling itself. And there's something, again, so fueling about that and cathartic as a musician. It's different types of creation, and I find myself having to have both in my life or mix them together in order to feel really, truly fulfilled as an artist.
That right there, Nika, is something that I totally wonder about, because when I listen to your music, I often wonder, and I wonder with other artists too, but like, what is the goal of creating a piece of music? Like, when you are putting something into the world for the first time or sharing it with listeners, is there a small part of you that says, I hope I can communicate something 100% as like they will experience exactly what I'm experiencing as a feeling or as an emotion or something that you want to say through music? Or is it to turn something over and kind of share it in the world and have people create their own meaning? I always wonder that with artists. Like, what is the goal?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that's the prerogative of every artist to decide how they use this medium, because art is nothing but a medium, to communicate something in one way or in another. So I guess what I end up doing is feeling everything is very intuitive. So, I mean, it's intuitive from like the seed. The seed is intuitive, where I usually go based on feelings. I don't like the pressure of trying to tell somebody what to think. It's more about trying to express my own sort of like desires in terms of like letting things out or expunging things or expelling them, and letting people kind of do with that what they will, Yeah, I mean, creation is such an intense thing. It's like, sometimes I don't think having a child would be easier, but I at least like the structure of it. It's like, it's so much more practical. You know what you're in for when you create a child. When you create a piece of work, you're imparting this meaning and this, like, you're letting yourself go as well. And there's so many different ways that can happen. And then once it's out there, Lord knows what it will do, It's a very intense process. And anyone that's an artist, I just have so much, or a craftsman, I have so much respect for, because it is such a vulnerable experience.
Yeah, and this kind of goes to one of the most haunting and kind of consciousness-raising parts of when I listen to your music is obviously your voice and how tonalities work. And you just touched on the power of the voice, and we have a listener question from Cameron Gray for you, Nika, who's asking, I'd like to ask about practices involving the voice in magic, how one might incorporate more song into their rituals, and what some resources for this might be. And Cameron says, I've always been interested in the stories of, sirens that sing sailors to their deaths, and the singing of fair folk that's magical by nature, and also the power of the voice in general. And Cameron also says, also a very big fan of your music. Definitely agree with Cameron, but yeah, like, what is it about the voice?
Oh, yeah. Oof. The voice, yeah. It's just so primal. It's animal. It's such an animal experience to sing or to yell or to scream. And I think about this weird scenario in my head, and I don't know if I got it from a movie or a book, or I don't know where I got this from, but I imagine a robot gaining consciousness for the first time, like real full-blooded consciousness, and then just all it can do is just scream at the top of its lungs in horror. That to me feels like what it's like to be a human, and that the minute you realize that you know way too much but not enough to know how to deal with it, it just makes me want to scream. And it's like this full throttle horror that I feel like is just like eviscerated through the voice. And I love that. But then also, like, I grew up singing. Like, that was my part of my recreation, was running through the woods, and I'm singing all day about nothing, you know. I'm writing songs constantly. It's not even writing. It's just my life is expressed through song. Ridiculously enough, I feel like I live in a musical. I don't. That's so annoying. But but it's just like it's just powerful. And I love also growing up in the woods and just being able to scream and yell as loud as I ever wanted. That I really got into just being, how loud can I get? How much can I project? I want to hear my voice bounce off the trees. Like, I want to hear the leaves like throw it back to me, even though they probably absorb it. But, you know, just that feeling of like aliveness and activity. And it's so much about activation. I just feel activated when I'm singing. It feels kind of like a weapon or something. There's something just really powerful about it. And sort of declamatory or something. I don't know.
That is fascinating about like a sentient AI being like becoming fully conscious. And the first thing, instead of taking over the world in an Illuminati conspiracy or it's Terminator 2 Judgment Day and there's replicating itself in the cloud and having cyborgs all over the place, it's just screaming at this kind of existential horror. Wow.
I mean, that's how I feel every day. Thank God I'm on a manageable dose of SSRIs, but pure despair about thinking about how we can be aware of ourselves enough to have this conversation, but not so aware that we have the answer to it. And again, there's that struggle with the unknown. We know we're here, but we don't know why. And that why is kind of massive when you think about it, you know. And so, you know, thankfully, again, like I also have Buddhism and a lot of strategies to get through it, and magic to get through that existential despair. But it's full on, at least for me. I don't know. I don't think I'm alone though.
I think this is a really good time to talk about this, because there's also this interesting power in, regardless of how negative emotions or things might be, about being human. And I thought this was a couple months ago when we were talking, but you made some fantastic points about the age of digitization, artificial intelligence, how some artists are really embracing artificial intelligence and embracing things that, you know, computers can do things better than humans ever could. And then you made some really good points about the primacy of the human experience. And you really talked about this thing called Technofascism. And can you just share with the listeners a little bit, Nika, about like what is Technofascism and what do you think people should keep in mind as we all live in this digital age?
Yeah, switching to politics, this is pretty much a political talk when you think about it, or when you throw fascism into the conversation. But, you know, anything relating to systems of power that can oppress vulnerable people, fascism. Since we've entered the 21st century, I'll say our technologies and the ways in which we use technology to improve our lives have greatly changed the way that we live. I mean, having so many different technologies advance so quickly in such a short amount of time under neoliberal capitalism has been very dangerous, because these technologies, which maybe early on were invented or created under good intentions to, you know, provide a new technology, which humans have been using technology since basically the beginning of time. That's how we've stuck around. Our ability to make tools and think resourcefully and create systems, and that's technology. But this digital technology, which I am a huge fan of, I am a huge computer nerd. I grew up using Linux, breaking computers down. I'm not a Luddite, but I do feel like we're living in a dangerous time where the people that own the technology are not necessarily dutiful or considering moral implications of what that means, because they're collecting data ceaselessly on us. The surveillance technology has become so sophisticated and implemented just so heavily in our cities that we're really losing our sense of privacy. And in turn, I'm not someone that likes to get on my high horse about liberty, but hell, we should be able to decide if we're being watched or not. I feel like that's just a human right, is to feel like our privacy is protected. And so now we're living in an age where we're living in utter distrust, because there is no trust. The trust has been broken. It's not only been broken by the government through the Patriot Act, but it's been broken by the corporations that own the technology, that are collecting information and selling it, and then selling it to marketing companies that just try to sell it back to us as products. And it's getting to the point where our sense of autonomy as individuals is being thwarted by people who are using information about us to try to control us in ways, whether it's getting to buy things or do things or believe things or stay places or, and then with tracking through the coronavirus. And it's a weird thing to talk about because when you really spell it out, it sounds crazy, but it is absolutely our reality, to the point where I can't even laugh it off as cyberpunk anymore, or as I can't even go near my Philip K. Dick or William Gibson books anymore, or J.G. Ballard books, because they just give me anxiety. Because these things that we knew, artists and thinkers and, ideologues from the past have told us, look, this technology cannot get in the wrong hands. Otherwise, there's going to be consequences. And lo and behold, it got in the wrong hands. And so now we're living under this threat of being controlled by these corporations that have been collecting information about us and putting cameras in everything that we own, and voice activated things and everything we own. It's completely absurd that we've allowed it to get this far out of the sheer illusion of convenience to us, the illusion that the technology is here to help us, as it should be. But, at the end of the day, a Trojan horse is a Trojan horse, and we really need to be careful about aligning ourselves or adopting these technologies that are not being sold to us in our best interest. It's really not good. It's not good. And I'm out here and I'm going, look, this isn't good. This is not good. And I strongly believe in that technology can be extremely useful and amazing. And again, I love it, but I'm starting to see the implications of how it can impinge on our human rights. And that is a much larger issue we need to get through before we can start idealizing what these technologies can do. It's AI can be used for some great stuff. It can be used to detect cancer, but it can also be used to racially profile people, criminally profile people inaccurately. It's being used for that more than it's being used for the good stuff. So let's not talk about all the great fanciful things the future can bring us under this utopia, when really the things that are actually pressing are the dystopia and the potential techno-fascist rule as these technologies and the people that own them begin to control us. Fascism. So, yeah, whatever. Anyway, that's my whole spiel, and it really freaks me out because, I believe in things being honest and pure, and this is all corruption, and it just does not smell good.
To that point, Nika, we have a listener question from Allie who's asking, what are your feelings, Nika, on artificial intelligence, and how does AI affect or influence our ability as humans, whether we're artists or not, to take back our power or creativity?
it's a great conversation to have about what is creativity and what is art. What does it serve? Who does it serve? Why does it serve us? What does it give us? And then you have to consider, if it was made by a computer, can it give you that same feeling? And that's something that I like to think about a lot late at night, because it's interesting to bring up then the quandary of the human soul and the human spirit. Can the human soul be synthesized? Can the spirit be synthesized? And then can a human, a lay human, mortal human, connect to computer-generated art in the same way that it can connect to human-generated art? Because personally, I feel like a massive component of art and my appreciation of art and why I make art is because of something that, I don't know if anyone's heard this word. It's called empathy. You guys have heard this word. It's called empathy, which I feel like empathy is something that is so deeply alive. That feeling of understanding. I understand what this person went through. I don't understand what this person went through, but I have a better idea after hearing this song or after watching this movie. 99% of the things that I watch movies about, I have never experienced in my life, but now I can feel as though I've experienced it because I've seen other people go through it. But when I watch CGI movies, the same thing, I can't connect with it. I can't connect with the CGI because I can't empathize with something that can't exist in a material world. And I don't mean that. Now I feel like I've gotten off track because I was talking about how the material world is very limiting. But there is something that it's hard to empathize with things that weren't created innately by humans or by this human struggle. So I don't know. I feel like I kind of talked myself into a corner because I can't empathize with CGI, but you know what I mean? Like, there's this feeling of how the potential for AI generated art to feel just innately empty or void of the soul. And I guess CGI graphics, like computer graphics, are one thing, but if a movie was written, directed, and starred all by computers, which is basically just a computation of other people's past experiences, like there's something about that ends up feeling like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, where I also feel, sorry, I'm thinking out loud right now, so you're just giving me an opportunity to work this stuff out. So some of this might be bullshit, but I just feel innately that, like, that experience I was talking about earlier, when I really feel as though I'm channeling something, and how that is the most powerful experience of being a human, is to either channel a creative thing or using creativity as a means of channeling or divining something, but then also witnessing that as an audience member, as a listener, as a viewer. You know, when I watch Tarkovsky, I feel like he is creating this world that is ineffable but so deeply, deeply felt, and I feel it and I sink into those images. There is something so human about it. There is that magical quality. But when I listen to Lil Miquela, the AI pop star, that's a commodity, and it's created in code to serve as a commodity, you know? So maybe we need to find AI generated art that is made with the same intention that Tarkovsky had when he made Stalker, you know, then we can start talking. But right now, AI is being used only in creative works. Well, Holly Herndon. Have you heard the Holly Herndon album?
No, I have not.
Her newest album was made with AI, and she's actually a great example of a contemporary artist who is using AI and using this technology in a way that is incredibly fresh and incredibly felt, and she is using it almost as in the same way as I would use myself as a divining rod. She's using it as her divining rod. It's her tool. It is an incredible prototype of how AI can be used in a truly artistic context, and I find that beautiful, you know. But she was using aspects of AI and choosing, and inevitably it's a human-made work, you know, but it's human-made, but, you know, anything that would just be completely generated by artificial intelligence 100% from beginning to end, I can't imagine that I would be able to empathize with it like that.
Just for the listeners, you're referring to the album Proto by Holly Herndon, and it says the album was a collaboration with an AI named Spawn that was co-created. Is kind of what you're saying too, Nika, is like using artificial intelligence as a tool, but the human, like the actual artist who's making the music, is engaging with AI as kind of a tool or an assistant to help give voice to or musicize, that's totally not a word, but to make in a musical format something that is very, very human, but AI is kind of like the tool.
Yeah, and you can tell. And listening to that album, I become overwhelmed with emotion and overwhelmed with respect for Holly Herndon. It doesn't reduce the art. In fact, it elevates it because it's inevitably a human-made work. And it's deeply, again, it feels deeply human. And so I do find that, AI can be worked and used in really beautiful ways, but I think using it as a novelty or using it as a means of replacing human creative labor feels dangerous because, I can get into that whole thing, but I feel like completely AI generated artists are still created by somebody. Somebody's coding, somebody is making decisions, but so far they've been used in ways that are extremely marketed and market researched, and, it's capital. This person, this thing, this entity is capital. I see that becoming very problematic very quickly, and it could be abused. But I think there's also like a lot of potential for it in good ways.
To your point, if I was listening to a piece of music and it was completely AI generated, I would also have a really hard time relating to that. Whereas when I listen to your music, your music is stained with human experience in a really good way because it really gets into the actual neurons of communicating a feeling or kind of a sonic diary. It's just stained with that. Whereas just like with AI, hey, isn't that great that AI is way better at chess than humans ever could be? I'm like, how is that going to affect my game with Nika in chess, where Nika beats me? Like, that is an authentically human thing. It's so weird that people, I think, sometimes tend to glorify this, incoming deity of AI, which, as you said, has many, many legitimate uses if used in the right way. But yet, here we are, and we're kind of deifying this when the human experience is so vital.
Yeah, that's one reason that I love singing, is because it's just such a human phenomenon. When I think about, okay, let's say I try to sing a line or something and I can't hit the notes. Or let's say I try to sing a high note and I can't hit it. But then someone else, they can sing a high note and they can hit it, but only with auto-tune. But they hit the note, but they didn't. It was auto-tuned and made to sound like they did. So they used auto-tune and they could hit the note. I did not use auto-tune and I couldn't hit the note. Okay, who cares if you can hit the note? You know what I mean? It's not about whether or not you can hit the note. It's about whether or not you can try to hit the note. And that is, for me, so much more interesting to hear. And that's where I feel like a lot of music these days is becoming so highly sort of computerized and quantized. And everything is like on pitch. Like, there's no sort of space for anything to be off because it's so easy to correct mistakes. It's like you're programming music, which is, again, cool. Like, I spend all day programming beats and programming music. Like, I'm not against it. But there's a point at which you're going to get diminishing returns because so much of experience is in between the ones and zeros. And so much of what makes the Ineffable so great isn't about hitting marks, which is something that, I've had to learn. Again, like I said, I struggle with like being very technically proficient, hitting the right notes and stuff, but that's not what I like in music. I like the messiness, the rawness. I like getting dirty, walking through the woods and feeling filthy and humid and sticky, and you're getting bug bites, and you're like, you haven't showered, and it's like, that's the part of life that feels really real. This, like, our obsession with trying to sterilize everything is so, again, like, innately human, and our desire to just squash out any inch of the natural world. We're not animals. We're not like them. We're not like the natural world. We live in these tall, like, sterile towers that have been sanitized from any potential bug infestation or anything. That's happening to our art as well, to the point where I feel like, is true expression really possible today, in an age like today, when there's so much pressure on everything being put into its perfect little place? Like, at some point, it just feels like there's only so much you can do there. And it's about the attempt to go for things, the approximation of things is how new things are made. You find things in that gray area and you let that stuff kind of congeal and gestate and boil, and then it creates these new things. But if we're not ever letting ourselves get there, then, I'm afraid that messiness won't stick around either.
One of the things that you're great at, Nika, that I really appreciate as a listener is embracing, for instance, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, live concerts and doing things in one take. And as you said, that being integral to kind of discovering new things or new ideas or new avenues to play with. Whereas, and tell me if I'm understanding you right, if you were just in this kind of sterile studio where everything was, auto-tuned, it was triple edited, it was, put together in just a perfect sheened, nice, 3-minute, perfect whatever, right? Like radio made, stamped, whatever, that would actually be detracting from what makes us human in the first place, wandering through the woods of music, getting those bug bites of ideas. I mean, is that somewhat fair?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried. I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I'm just like, I get confused sometimes, especially growing up in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, oh, is this being a musician? Oh, so I have to, whatever, like, oh, maybe I need to make things that are a little bit cleaner or that, sound shiny. But realizing that I don't really appreciate that music anyway, because when you listen to all these pop songs, whatever, I sound like I'm like an 85-year-old man shaking his hand at a cloud. But I think more than ever, like, pop these days is so hyperbaric. It's like the air has been just sucked out of the music. There is nothing there. Like, damn. And so you end up listening to a song, and it could be Ariana Grande, it could be Selena Gomez, it could be Gaga, it could be anybody. But it's like the song could belong to anybody, it can be anywhere, it could do anything. It's like, it sounds already like 4 songs that have already existed within the past 5 years. It just gets to a point where it's like, talk about paint by numbers. Like, these songs have no identity, they have no life, there's no air, there's no personality, there's no story, there's just notes and rhythm, but it's all vaguely danceable and all vaguely easy to understand, nothing too challenging. And it's just like, damn, okay, not much variety, especially you'd think 2020, postmodernism, you'd think there'd be more variety, but there's like getting less and less variety because people feel like they have less and less to work with because everything needs to be so easily sanitized and packed into these little ones and zeros.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And especially when I think about like the digital landscape, and I'm really curious your thoughts on this, there seems to be this like urging or subconscious kind of weird collective zeitgeist that's slowly pushing us to, we all need to be interconnected digitally, fiber optically connected all the time. And not only that, when someone puts out a piece of music or someone releases something or whatever, we all need to make sure that we're thinking the same things and saying the same things and making sure and it's almost like there's this push, especially when you think about like virtual reality and things like that, to kind of connect everyone so that we're all the same, but then at the same time that kind of takes away from, as you mentioned, your unique individual human experience. And I'm just curious, like, as an artist, where do you see those tensions playing out between, as you mentioned, this kind of human-stained individual, I walked through the Wisconsin woods, I was the one who was, making wood violet syrup. I was the one who was wandering. Here's the music that I produced around that and created around that, and I released it. And there's all these people weighing in with, oh, we're going to have a reaction to this, but we never went through the Wisconsin woods. We never did. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that's making any sense, but do you see if there are any tensions playing out, or maybe not?
In 2020, there are at least two kinds of art, or let's just say music. There's music that sells things and is made to sell things fundamentally, and then there's music that is made to try to capture the ineffable. I think you can figure out pretty quickly which is which. And I do find that when people, though, feel like this song is more of the former, which is like music being made to sell something, it is caught in the very binary in which it exists. Well, is it good or is it bad? Is it selling me or is it not selling me? You know, am I sold on it, or should I get it or should I leave it, take it or leave it, you know? And so there's this more of this shopper consumer mentality about the music, where it's like you're creating something that either is like an in-demand commodity or not. Rather, when you create something that is just an ineffable experience, and whether or not it's individual to you or you made it with a band, but it's not really trying to sell anything, it just is. It's just trying to communicate something or channel something. It's quite easy to tell the difference between the two, but I will say that when people do intuit it to be that type of music, they approach it and experience it and give it the space that it needs in order to exist in that way. It's not about pass fail. It's not about giving it a grade. It's not about deciding as a consumer whether you love it or hate it, keep it or toss it. It just is. And that is a really beautiful, incredible human experience where things can exist in this sort of meditative, nebulous state. And it's not about quantifying it. It's just about letting it be. And if it resonates with you, it's there for you. If it doesn't resonate with you, well, something else will resonate with you. But it doesn't mean that it's bad or whatever. There is no qualitative statement you can make about it. Those things, I think, can like blend into one another as well. But, you know, it just depends on your intention as a musician. I have created music with the intention of selling it. I have created music as a commodity. You know, I've written songs, and I've, in my more desperate days before I had Patreon, I would like try to write songs for ads. Like I tried to write a song for a Burt's Bees ad, for a movie trailer, for like whatever, you know, anything that like anybody can get me, because I just needed some extra money. And I couldn't, it was very hard for me to do, because you're constantly thinking about it like it's a test, and you've got to like ace the test. So God bless anyone who operates in that minefield of being a musician. It is really challenging, because at that point you're just kind of a laborer.
I know that you discuss this elsewhere as well, but like the evolution of your albums too, and your own pieces, you know, like Taiga being very different from Okovi in many ways. And how do you go through, and especially looking back on your own evolution, like, is it a conscious process, or is it something that just kind of develops, like it just develops from musical piece to musical piece?
Well, I feel like I do a lot of reflection. I'm very just always thinking, always reflecting, always doing inner work, you know, really trying to spelunk and figure out who I am, what I want. You know what I mean? Really ask those questions. And so there is always a lot of strife that came through that journey of releasing albums, trying to figure out who I am, and also facing a lot of the stress of trying to learn like who I was supposed to make music for, if it was for me or if I was supposed to make it for somebody else, or I didn't, you know, no one tells you how to do this. So you're just kind of trying to be true to yourself and also navigate how to survive in this, you know, world where you're not automatically supported when you make music. You know, takes more strategy than ever these days, which is really, really exhausting and not creative. But, you know, so that journey has been a part of my growth. Also, you know, having just gone through my 20s being a musician, it's just about becoming an adult, learning who I am, learning what I have to say, how I can say it, and finding different ways to get those messages across, and, you know, hitting bumps in the road and writing some songs that really have resonated with me in terms of my artistic path, and then writing songs that have resonated with others in my sort of like external path. I do find that I've noticed that I'm kind of a ping ponger. So I bounce between extremes of things. And then I think I'll probably eventually find the middle by the time I hit my 60s or 70s. But, I'm kind of like just constantly going one way and then realizing that's not the right way, going the other way really fast, realizing maybe that doesn't feel right. Then, I'm trying to find the middle ground. But it's, it's a process. And I try to be kind to myself more than ever, be kind to the process and the journey, and knowing that, nothing I make is definitive, and it's all just a part of who I was at that time, what I was going through, what challenges I was facing. Try not to let that part of the narrative define itself before it's arrived.
To that point, we have a listener question from Aquis Knox, who is asking, speaking of other humans, who are some of your most influential musical inspirations, even in the greater art sphere?
I have several women that I use as these touchstones for when I'm feeling kind of lost. And that's when influences can be, they're not really influences, but they're like sisters to me, at least the women are. But Maria Callas, because she was so devotional to her craft, and she was excellent. She was an excellent interpreter. She was so driven and so just relentless with her work ethic, and just constantly sought that perfection within herself, whatever perfection means. But I just really find her as very inspiring. I have a big painting. My mom made a big painting of her that I have in my studio. So I look over whenever I'm feeling sort of overwhelmed or stressed, and just seeing her painted face gives me some energy. But then also Tilda Swinton is an actress who I love, and she's kind of a living legend to me, and has such like a beautiful story, and she's been so true to herself, and her intentions as an artist have always been very just motivated by nothing other than her own sort of path or journey. It seems very unwavering, and I just appreciate her artistry and her craft. And then there's Marina Abramovich, who is a performance artist who's pretty polarizing, but I just appreciate her energy. She has this really strong, powerful female energy. It's kind of like she's kind of the crone archetype, or like the witch. She's just this like amazing force of nature who has pushed herself and her body and her mind to great limits, but has always done so in such a feminine way. It's very, I do find her very, very magical and powerful. And so I think she's cool too. But, there's women throughout history as well. Catherine the Great has always been a big influence to me, because she just was tenacious and smart and capable and powerful. And yeah, I don't know. There's like these little, sisters throughout history. Oh, also Diamanda Galas. I find her to be just an extremely, she's just incredible. She's just so talented, skillful, interpretive. Her artistic energy is so unique, and she's definitely fulfilling some sort of archetypal role in music that I feel like when she's gone, our world will have a gaping void. And I don't think anybody has the shoes or the voice big enough to fill her role in our world. Yeah.
It sounds almost like a personal pantheon almost, where you can kind of draw from these artists and creators and musicians' lives. I'm wondering too, Nika, and this is another question that we do have from Aquis Knox, which is, do you do anything to get in a creative headspace? And I guess to that point, like you were, I think, posting on social media about you're going to make wood violet syrup. You did make wood violet syrup.
Yeah.
And as someone so connected to nature, I mean, going through and it being that time of year where you can move out into the garden and into the fields and into the woods and kind of engage in this very organic way of collecting things and making things and creating things. Is that a process that you use in terms of, and use is really the wrong word, but kind of engage with nature to get into a creative headspace? Or are there other things you do that can kind of put you in that creative headspace? Or do you even do anything consciously to get into a creative headspace?
Yeah, no, I definitely do, especially lately as I've been sort of like confused about where I'm supposed to be putting my energy, and really thinking about, I've been reflecting on what it takes for me in order to feel creatively motivated. And I realized that I require a lot of alone time and a lot of silence, because my mind is it's just so chaotic that if I'm constantly distracted, if I'm even like looking at a phone or a computer or watching TV or reading, like it's taking up that space that is normally full of thoughts and ideas and wanderings and musings and questions and desires and fantasies and worlds. And so being in nature is great because it just allows me to close all those doors of distraction and just let things take me where they will. Also, meditation is extremely important to me because it just gives me time to clear my space, clear my head. It's even like a vacation from those thoughts, you know. It really washes me. But also the thing that I think is the most fun is active imagination or journeying, which is probably the most like direct form of quote unquote magic that I really connect with, because it's been something I've done my whole life. And I never really knew there was a word for it until recently, until I started getting into magic and realizing that active imagination or journeying or doing mind stuff, it's like real deal for me. So I do that. I try to do that a lot, but it's a hard thing to make time for because it's hard to convince yourself to spend a couple hours just with your eyes closed and like taking a portal into another world that you have to give into. And it's really intense, but it fills the cup, you know?
We have a listener question from Allie who's asking, how do you, Nika, incorporate magic and or ritual into your art and creative process? And I guess just to dovetail on that, can you share also a little bit more about this kind of use of the imagination and what that is and how you do that? I mean, that is just so fascinating to me.
My whole life I spent so much time alone just because I'm an introvert. I love people, but it's just whatever. Anyway, you get it. So I spent a lot of time alone in my bedroom and listening to music, laying on my bed, and, you know, just, I didn't realize it when I was a kid, but, you know, constantly trying to astral project. Or as a child, I was really obsessed with dreams. And in my more depressed ages, I would just try to sleep all day because I thought that I created this world in my dreams that was like, I thought was my real reality. And that waking life was like the secondary reality that I had to get through. It was like some weird peripheral physical part of life, but my main life was lived through my dreams. And there I could do more, I could experience more, I could travel more, I could, you know, really, it was just such a more like enriched life. I really developed that other ulterior world as I grew up and, you know, became, again, science, whatever, that's all fake. You know, dreaming all day, what? For who? Why? Doesn't pay the bills. So then you stop doing that. And then several years ago, I went through a really traumatic period in my life, and I had rediscovered sort of more magical leaning experiences as a means to deal with that trauma. And through that, I was able to, rediscover that relationship with my inner life and inner world and really strengthen it. I started reading some Josephine McCarthy, who I love, and she has some great activities on how to strengthen the active imagination, and started reading Jung and trying to figure out, like, how do I harness this world again, because there's something there that isn't just a part of me. It's, you know, when you feel something and then you realize, I think everyone that gets into magic has this aha moment where it's like everything feels like it's fake and you're just doing whatever, but then something from outside of you comes in and it feels like you're being invaded. But that's the feeling, that's the empirical evidence that I needed to feel like this is real. Is to that feeling of invasion and active imagination and go, holy shit, wait a minute. I mean, I thought of that, but also where did that come from? Because I didn't know about that before, and things like that, which are really cool and exciting. But then just learning to trust that world, because the more trust you have and the more of that energy that's really hyper focused, laser focused on the integrity of what that is, it just grows and blossoms very quickly.
I totally can resonate with the fact that, like, being in the world and dealing with all the little mundane stuff every day and just, like, everything. And just like you, I love people. They're great. But I definitely also really appreciate, like, sleeping for 12 hours. That's also really fun. So when it comes to that, does the active imagination, like, does that happen consciously, like, right before a live performance, or when you're composing, or is it something that happens kind of, as you mentioned, when you do take that alone time and no one else is around, there's no recording equipment, and you can just engage in the active imagination?
Yeah, it's like a muscle. So, I try to train the muscle when I'm not using it. And that's when I can collect ideas as well. You kind of go spelunking or deep diving, and you come back. I've come back out with sigils, or I've come back out with things that feel deeply meaningful and that will spill over into my creative work. I'm mining my consciousness, all the time, really, but especially during those quote unquote sessions. But then a really cathartic aspect of making music is really channeling that musically. And that takes, it's kind of trance-like, and so I don't know if it's worth listening to, but it definitely feeds me when I'm making it, and that's just using music, using my voice, or, using a piano or whatever as a conduit for that deep dive is super fun as well. So I do a little bit of both. It takes all kinds.
That kind of goes to what Cameron was asking about, in terms of incorporating song into rituals. And, like, when you do this deep dive and you come back with sigils, or you come back with specific kind of esoteric pockets of information that you can work with and wisdom that you can work with, does that translate into, I can incorporate this vocalization perhaps into a ritual, or vice versa? Like, I can incorporate this kind of sigilization into an actual piece of music that I'm working on?
Yeah, it's usually just about setting the mind up and the spirit up to just be present and to have easier access to that feeling, because the more you do it, and actually I haven't been doing it very often lately, and I've been feeling quite clammy, creatively clammy, and I think that's why, is because when you have this consistent relationship with your inner world, it's really easier to dip into it more quickly or with more ease than, say, when you aren't actively meditating or aren't actively journeying or doing active imagination regardless. So I really think it truly feels like a muscle, and something that I need to keep kind of like oiled and constantly, the muscle a little bit sore in order to feel like I can easily work with that.
Okay, and so all of this actually kind of brings us to your amazing work that you're doing now. And again, listeners, we'll link to Nika's Patreon, but COVID-19 and your Sonic Diary and all of these other projects that you're working on. I guess, can you just kind of tell us, so, okay, everyone, let me step back. Geez, Alex, can't even drink coffee. It's too much coffee. It's like, I'm going to interview. This is the editing process, right? Like, I can take out the ridiculous ramblings that I'm making
leave
right
it
in. No.
Honesty. It's honesty.
Fine. I will leave this in for the listeners.
Kept that one in.
All right. Gonna leave it in. Oh, this is so bad. Okay, so in my ever caffeinated state, which I will leave all of this in. So with COVID-19, but one of the things is we've all experienced this, and in so many different ways. I mean, speaking with Meredith Graves, obviously being in New York, that is just I can't even begin to imagine all of the different challenges and different things that she and others are working through, and the world's experienced this. And I'm wondering, like, as an artist, can you kind of walk us through, since January till now, like, how did your world change? Was it that rapid, or was it more of a gradual thing?
Yeah, it was pretty weird, because I'm currently at the point of my writing process where the next thing that I have planned is to go to the studio and record the instruments and record my voice and just finish the record. record. But because this record is highly collaborative, I'm having live drums, live strings, choir, like a bunch of stuff. It was just going to be a lot of traveling. I had to supposed to go to LA in March, and then I was supposed to go to New York. I was supposed to be in New York right now finishing my record. I was supposed to go to Berlin to record with the choir in April, and none of that happened. And it all had to just be postponed until further notice. And then the shows that I had planned, I had some shows planned, and those have all been postponed or canceled. And so I'm really struggling with trying to figure out where I'm supposed to put my energy right now, because technically it's like, what, should I try to finish my record? Should I try to record things remotely? It's a really weird time to have a project that's already quite there's aspects of it that are nebulous and other aspects that are done. So then I'm just feeling kind of, I don't know, the rug has been pulled out from under me, and my life is on pause until I know when I can start traveling again and, getting all these people recorded and stuff like that. So it's been weird. Yeah, it's been weird. And so then I started this Kali Yuga thing for Patreon, which was my exercise in having those sort of open channels of feeling, sort of unperturbed from framework or structure or pressure, and to just really find a place to put that energy in a musical way. And that's been interesting, but lately I haven't been able to do it because I've just been so busy with other things trying to survive in this time period. It's quite chaotic. It's just hard. I'm sure with everybody, our lives are kind of, for better or for worse, on pause. So it's given me time to really focus on my next record and go, okay, wait, what songs do I really love? What songs don't I love? Can I write some new songs? I'm kind of buying some time for that, but at the same time, I feel pretty confused about what to do next.
When you were going through this process, Nika, with Kali Yuga, did you find that it helped you channel this kind of restless energy that you shared with patrons that you were kind of experiencing? And did it kind of give kind of a voice to maybe listeners who were feeling I know myself, just experiencing all kinds of emotions and reactions and things like that? Did it help channel that in any way?
Yeah, it did. But then it was also weird because there's an aspect of this psychic trauma of this time period that is really hard to be creative. It's hard. There's just so much anxiety and so many unknowns that, I try to put that into the song in a productive way. But then there's an aspect of it that is really disturbing to me. The energy is so disturbing that I don't want to sit long with it. So there were phases of this experience of dealing with COVID. There were a lot of movies I couldn't watch. There's shows I couldn't watch. There's music I couldn't listen to. Things were really I was very anxious, and there was a lot of stuff that just made me feel worse. And a lot of that included creating. It just made me feel dread and anxiety. And so I kind of had to pump the brakes a little bit and just try to, it's kind of self-preservation in a way. I'm okay, I just have to get through this right now. I can't really be creative. I can't be the divining rod for this moment. It's too much. I think everyone's been going through that. It's crazy energy, and we're just trying to get through it, so God bless to everybody. It's a mess right now.
You're right. I think we were all in this period of what the heck is going to happen in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I still don't know. I'm starting to wonder, should I go? Should I go to LA? Should I go to New York? Should I go to, should I pick up and start? Is it okay? It's not okay. It's also so weird because our world is so divided right now because it's become this culture war. It's become this huge political issue. How to face this pandemic, how to face this sort of collective catastrophe that we're feeling, this confusion. At least in America, we don't have a strong enough leader that's giving us unification and guidance and solidarity. He's heightening the contradictions even more and using this as a means to divide the American people even more, which is such a disingenuous thing to do to the American people. We need a leader. Someone just give us some hope, because we just don't know what to do. And so we're all on our own. And it's just like, God forbid. I'm not an epidemiologist. Like, I don't know how to get through this. I'm having to do crazy amounts of research because there's just so much misinformation and mass confusion and chaos and hysteria, and people are getting angry and resentful, and it's just making the environment so hostile that it's really hard to find peace. So I guess I got to the point where I just had to find peace for myself before I felt like I was strong enough to be able to contextualize this as a creator.
Just like you said, everything is so polarized and there's so much tension and there's so much anxiety in a global way. And I think this actually leads to Allie's question for you, another question from Allie. And she's saying, for you, Nika, how is this pandemic, this incredibly anxious, stressful thing, how is it changing the way that artists and their fans connect? And what are some of the long-term lessons and changes that kind of you've seen from either a personal perspective or an artistic perspective?
I think this is going to be a breaking point in some ways. A couple years ago, I started feeling like the current music industry was really not working well for me. I mean, I was able to survive, but I just felt like I work so hard and I'm still struggling. And I used to think that was my fault. And yeah, to an extent, everything is, your fault. But like, it's my fault for not wanting to make music as a commodity. It's my fault for not wanting to pander my art to corporations who would pay me a ton of money to have my music in a car commercial. It's my fault for not colluding with the consumerism of music. And I don't feel like I need to take responsibility for that, to the point where I can't even survive what I'm doing, even though I have fans and an audience. And I've been doing this for a long time. Like, there was just a really horrible distribution of power and wealth, not only in the world, but in the music industry. A really bad maldistributed opportunities and resources, and any sort of like utopian democratization of music that we were hoping for with the age of digital technology had been like everything quickly snatched up or grabbed up by the corporate elite or big tech such as Spotify. And they use loopholes, and they just use good old cronyism and strategies of gatekeeping in order to keep musicians fully autonomous. Basically, we just become reliant on ad money because all of the corporations have bought up all of the outlets that would be available to us to have access to our fans. They put a giant gate up and they give us literally halves of pennies for people who stream our work or whatever. So anyway, the gumption in me, I was like, this is wrong. This isn't right. I can't live this way. I can't keep living like this as a musician. So as someone that enjoys podcasts such as Glitch Bottle, I was aware of Patreon through podcast culture and saw that it really worked for a lot of podcasters to be able to maintain a presence and maintain their podcast and create it and survive off of it and make like some good money. Like Chapo Trap House makes some good money. But you know what? It's not through ads. It's through fans. It's through the people that are actually enjoying or consuming the work. It just made me feel so frustrated because I'm like, why can't musicians have that? Why can't we have that autonomy to find our fans directly and go, look, this is a relationship between us. This isn't a relationship between me and an advertiser or me and a corporation or me and a record label that ends up spewing stuff to fans. Like, I'm DIY till I die. Like, I'm on an indie label and I just see things like that way. I just want to go direct to the source. So I started a Patreon kind of like, even though at the time it felt very unusual. At the time, only I think Amanda Palmer had a Patreon, and she had gotten a lot of flack for her use of Kickstarter and Patreon, and so I was a little scared of what people would say, but I really felt like this was the new way to find support as for being an underground musician. It's been just such a blessing. Like, it changed my life. It gave me stability, and it gave me the energy to be able to make art that I felt like was so much less of that consumer thing and so much more about like the guts of why I do what I do. And I found people that supported that, and that was awesome. So then when COVID came, it was not that problematic for me because I already have that support system set up through Patreon. And since COVID, a lot of other artists have, in desperation, gotten Patreons, and they're discovering the power of this direct relationship. And it's been awesome to see my friends discover this and feel for the first time how cool it is to be able to talk with fans and have a patronage type relationship. And it's more of a friendship. It's more of like, we're looking out for each other, you know? It's more communal. It reminds me more of like the punk scenes that I was into when I was growing up, you know, and like Crass and stuff. And I'm really happy that I have that right now as I'm in complete limbo. And I think that is the future.
One of the big things that you've done, even just a few days ago, as the time we're recording this, is, like you said with Patreon, it's having that technological connection and using it in a good way. And to that point, you had a live show that you did. You use technology where you connect with people even during a pandemic. And with your permission, I'd just like to read one of the posts that you made on Instagram where you said, quote, "Thank you to everyone who tuned into my show last night. It was really so special and fun. I want to do more of these. I will admit that it felt very strange to perform into an abyss without feedback from an audience. It was at times freeing, but mostly felt like I was missing such an integral part of the experience. I can't wait to be able to play proper shows again and look each one of you in the eyes. That connection is so deeply nourishing and nothing can replace it, but I'm glad we have this at least," unquote. And I guess the question would be, years from now, when we have as a species at least contained COVID-19, let's say, not, of course, banish it or anything like that, do you think that even after the pandemic, these kind of digital live concerts will become much more of a regular thing, or do you think that they will become like something only in specific times, or will they become more prominent?
Well, that asks us to predict the future, which right now is so hard to do. It's hard for me to know what the future is going to look like because I don't think it's as easy as picking up and returning to normal. It's not going to be like that. And I think that our sort of like transition, quote unquote, back to a normal will be very slow, and it will transition us into something new. And I think that is the case because people are starting to live differently. They're starting to prioritize different things. They're starting to recognize their habits, and we're starting to see the effect that not traveling and not going out so much has had on our climate. And also we're entering a depression, or if we haven't already gotten there, it's going to be a different era. It's going to be a different time. We don't know what that's going to look like. So I think that with that being said, musicians, as well as everybody, needs every single tool at their disposal in order to have autonomy with what they do, in order to try to find an audience and reach people and find support. And so I feel like if live streaming, I think it will continue growing because it has been growing in the gaming community for a long time. I feel like it's only inevitable that the music community will find its footing there as well, because it's a great way for people to reach others across the world. We're living in such a global society, global world right now, that level of connection is really necessary. Like, there's somebody that could be living in Rhode Island, but makes K-pop music and is only into K-pop or something like that. And so, but they would be able to have a fan base in Korea, you know, where more people are into K-pop, naturally, just through the telecommunication, through the internet and through live streaming, you know. So we're able to really see the work of globalism more purely. And we're also just seeing how the internet has induced globalism. And I feel like that is going to really reveal itself more clearly, that we're coming out of an age of physical communities and we're entering the age of global or digital communities. And that makes live streaming really convenient. When Someone from Russia and someone from Japan and someone from Germany can all watch somebody from San Diego play a live show. That's cool. But man, the tangibility and the physicality of being in a room full of people that's an animal instinct. That is oxytocin. That is undeniable, and that will not go away. It might just change or be augmented by other tools.
And I think that kind of leads to your point about artificial intelligence, which is another listener question from Allie, where she's asking, how does this long-term quarantine affect our interactions and or dependence with artificial intelligence? Do you think that artificial intelligence, like artists might be coming out of that using this as more of a tool, just like Holly is using it as a tool? Or do you think it might be something different? Or what do your instincts say about that?
It's tough because, again, it's just about how the tools are available to us. So Holly is extremely bright, extremely well-educated, very smart. She knows how to use these technologies, and probably, in fact, invented a lot of the technology that she used for her album. I don't know for sure. I'm just assuming she's a genius because she seems like it. But I feel like I'm not using AI in my music. I use computer-generated tools or generative tools, but I'm also afraid of who owns the tools, who's using them. Artificial intelligence in a creative context isn't necessarily freely available to the layperson quite yet, but it is being used in research or experimental capacities, but mostly being used to simulate or synthesize versions of things that already exist or are already kind of like that consumerist type of music. So it's being used as a commodity rather than as like an artistic tool of artistic expression. But that will be exciting to see how the tools can develop and how we can use them in a creative context as another paintbrush or whatever, or rather than little Michaela or whatever.
What I love, too, and you were sharing this on Patreon, is you kind of taking steps in this regard to kind of empower artists and creators to connect with other artists as well, other musicians. And with that, can you kind of share, Nika, just with the listeners who maybe haven't heard about this, about, I'm probably totally mispronouncing this, is it choir.tv?
Yeah, choir.
Yeah, choir.tv. Like, this is an awesome idea, and you're spearheading this. Can you just share with us, like, what is that about?
Yeah, well, for a while, I was really interested in live streaming. I mean, I got in some arguments on the internet over live music becoming obsolete, and I'll say that I just don't want live music to become obsolete. You know what I mean? And I was really interested in the idea of live streaming being a way, like Patreon, for musicians to have autonomy over what they do. They can decide, hey, I'm going to live stream from my bedroom. I'm going to play this show from my studio. And it's just a new way to connect with people. And so I wanted to, basically, the sort of like type A person I am, I wanted to make sure that I was responsible for creating some of the earlier aspects of the technology so I could ensure that they weren't being corrupted by corporations, because I was just really afraid that Twitch, Amazon, Google, Facebook, whoever would come in and take that opportunity of the democratization of the technology away from us. So again, we would be beholden to big tech or these big corporations that don't have our best interests in mind and are trying to exploit us and exploit our labor, or exploit our art for their profit. When COVID happened and I felt like live streaming would become inevitable, very quickly I worked with some friends, my partner Devin Welsh and my friend Eric Zuring, who's a web developer, and we wanted to just put up a HQ sort of base camp for finding out about live stream shows. So people can submit their live stream info, and then you can scroll and see what's playing and tune in. And we also wanted to have a really sort of sophisticated resource section, because streaming is really convoluted often, especially if you're a musician. We started a Discord server so people could ask questions and troubleshoot. And I just really, really wanted to make sure that independent and underground musicians, people that are DIY, that they have the tools they need in order not only to live stream, but in order to get their live stream out there into the open and public and to promote it. because, people are tweeting and Instagramming and going on Instagram Live, and you missed it and you never knew and you weren't subscribed to their newsletter or whatever. And it's it'd be cool to just have some one spot where everything that was going on you could see. And down the road, we wanted to do something like Twitch, where we could make our own platform and host that and really have full control over the autonomy angle, because that's just our main concern. That takes a lot of, again, more resources that we don't have. That was the goal. And if it's useful to people, that's great. If not, hey, whatever, just trying to help however I can in this crazy mixed up world.
Indeed. Well, certainly restoring a semblance of organization and encouragement, I could say, for creators and artists, Nika. I think that's fantastic. And listeners as well, we'll make sure to link to choir.tv in the video description and the podcast description as well. We, Nika, also have a listener question from Douglas of the What Magic Is This podcast, who is asking you, which figure, Nika, either historical or contemporary, encapsulates the perfect marriage of the occult and art, that to separate the two would mean that they would not be able to flourish in either realm?
My first thought was this French painter, Odilon Redon, who makes these beautiful symbolic paintings that are very dreamlike. But, you think about, what does that really mean, Because I do feel as though people that make work that does not seem esoteric or occult in one way or another is channeling something very direct in that way. But it's always hard to know people's intentions. But that's a good question. I want to think about that one more because it's interesting, because then you kind of have to, like I said, you have to think about somebody's intention about where is this coming from. And it can be something very realistic or very impressionistic, but yet it can be coming or be born out of this extremely profound place within the maker.
This kind of goes to another issue, which is your music is magic. It's a form of esoteric communication, as I see it. I mean, when I listen to your music, I am affected, almost as if, if you had someone in a ritualistic sense, invoking a spirit in ecclesiastical Latin and having it accomplish some, foreordained task, there is an effect that is there. And so, I mean, do you ever think about your music being magic, being a form of affecting change, not in the Newtonian physics way, where there's, the second law of thermodynamics and gravity, but the laws of meaning and communication and, making those connections? I don't know. I mean, is that something that ever consciously crosses your mind?
It's interesting because it's something that I don't like words, because words make me think about things in a specific way. So when you asked that question, intuitively, it's never anything that I put into words like that. But it is it's an intention, especially when I'm performing live. I feel like I'm being sort of taken over. People say, oh, I'm possessed on stage. People love to say that shit, but it's true. It's I feel like I am possessed on stage. There are these people in front of you, potentially a lot of people, potentially a few people. It depends on, if I'm in Omaha or New York City, but, regardless, there are these people in front of you and you're communicating something in a way that is kind of abstract and weird and doesn't necessarily make direct sense, but the feeling of it is so instinctive or intuitive that is an incredibly magical and profound experience to be performing in front of somebody and seeing. And it's kind of like an unburdening in a way for myself. It's one of the only times I feel unburdened. I'm able to give my burden to other people. I'm able to give that energy out to them. And then I say, you deal with it. And I think that's why I find performing so cathartic, is because it's one of the only times in my life I lean on people. I say, listen to me. I need to let go of this, and I give it to you, and then you have to take care of it. It's kind of like relinquishing the demon and throwing it off on somebody else. I guess I never thought about it like that, but I do feel that it's such a relief when I get off stage. Not because I'm off stage, but because I feel like I shed some skin. I lost some weight, being up there. And unfortunately, everyone else has to go home with that extra skin and weight and deal with it.
Damn it. I had a really good time watching Nika. Now I have to deal with all this stuff for the next 5 weeks. That's great.
I love it. It's your problem now, bitches. Take it.
Well, so that, Nika, relates to this question from Annalise Antoinette, who is asking, along the lines of audio or visual synesthesia, or even things like clairaudience or clairvoyance or other physical psychic phenomenon, can you, Nika, kind of share your thoughts or insights on perceptions within musical experience, and perhaps any relation or crossover to perceptions within magical experience?
The feeling that real magical oomph, that heft, comes... I'm trying to think about this because I don't want to self-mythologize too much. So I really want to answer these questions honestly, because it's easy for me to go, oh, I'm clairaudient. Honey, my music comes from the future. But I don't believe that. I mean, I truly believe that very clearly my voice is, and not my speaking voice, but when I'm singing, it is the most holy. I feel so holy myself, and so wholly embodied and strong and vulnerable all at the same time. It is just like everything is coming to the forefront, but there's something about that is really incandescent, and it's hard for me to understand fully. You know, it's also hard for me because I feel like there's an aspect of myself that's extremely visually inclined. I'm very sensitive to my environment, I'll say that. So how things look and feel are really important to me, almost as important as how they sound. But then how they sound, it's so hard for me to divorce the music from the environment, and I get very stressed about that because then music needs to be heard in a particular context, and I can't control that. So there's something about music and about sound that I feel like is one part of a bigger experience. And it's hard for me to divorce it sometimes. So when I'm writing, I'm often thinking the music is three-dimensional and it doesn't just exist sonically. And so I guess that's where I get frustrated on some sort of like esoteric or abstract level, is feeling like the music is only one part of the feeling, and only being able to communicate that or to channel through sound. Sometimes I feel like I have shackles on or something. Like, it's a huge limitation for me when I feel like I'm feeling things in like three-dimensionally and environmentally in a way. I don't know if that gets at it, but that's kind of something that inspired me to share.
As a listener, absolutely. It's totally multidimensional. It's not just the power of the music, which of course is central, but it's also, oh my gosh, I remember what I was doing. I remember what I was feeling. I remember that time in my life when something was going on, you know, so it does take this multidimensionality as well.
That's sort of scary. That's scary for me because it means that I don't have control over the whole story. So there's something really beautiful and kind of exquisite about that, where you make this thing, but it's only like a quarter of what you know it's going to be. Like, the listener's experience fills in these blanks, and it gives the music, or it gives the piece, the water to grow and blossom. But how it blossoms is entirely unique based on each individual person that hears the song. And my experience of the song is completely different from that as well. So not having control over the entire thing or the entire experience, I guess, there's something really humbling to that. And I love thinking about music that way, even though it's sort of terrifying, but it relieves some of the pressure, because I'm like, look, I'll give you the song, you make the memories, you make the world around it. I mean, I can only do so much, but sometimes I dream of having like a Wagnerian approach and making an opera and, like, you know, forcing people into some weird canonical black box where they all have to have the very same experience that I want them to have. But that seems a little fascist, too.
Nika.
Or authoritarian.
Right. Stay tuned in 2021 when Nika will be releasing her ring cycle, and it will be fantastic. Exactly. And if you don't think exactly right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'd make a ring cycle, though, for sure.
Oh, well, okay. So this absolutely touches on something, which is it's the environment and the aesthetic, but it's not a surface aesthetic. Like when I watch your visual presentations, listen to your music, I do get a sense of that kind of being terrified because, and this is something that we've had previous guests on talking about the connection between shamanism and esotericism and shamanism and magic is, in a way, as an artist, and I'm curious if you might see yourself in this light, you really are kind of dancing on the edge of a precipice, kind of staring in a Nietzschean sense into the void until it stares back into you. And whereas other people like myself who do not create music, in a way, we kind of rely on the artist as shaman, the artist to dance at that precipice. I mean, when you experience that terror, as you say, kind of being like, oh my gosh, this is kind of out of control and only a quarter of it is what I can nudge and the rest of it, the, machinations of the universe take over. Do you also kind of see that as not channeling in a way, but almost in a shamanistic sense? Like you are out there, you are receiving things as a conduit, and you're also shaping things, whereas a lot of other people don't shape those things.
Yeah, I mean, I actually recently, as I've been really, again, doing all this inner work, et cetera, I've felt a deep, unexplainable connection to shamanism. It's sort of it's hard for me because I never feel like I deserve to be interested in anything, but that's here nor there. The point is that I felt that there is this connection between music and shamanic healing, and how so much of what I do feels because what I do is so intuitive, and it is coming from such a deep need to connect with my own humanity as well as other humans. It feels like I'm participating in this pact with the listener, and that I'm providing this care and this empathy and this understanding. Yeah, I'm just creating this that I can then let the listener sort of heal with. They can use it as a tool to heal or to understand themselves better, or to also feel connected to humanity. I've been really interested in that, and then just the history of the shaman as somebody who lives on the outskirts of town and devotes their lives to healing and devotes their lives to creating conditions that help people heal or become stronger or connect to themselves on a deeper level. And I just really, really appreciate that archetype. It would be an honor to participate in that lineage in one way or another.
I hope the listeners appreciate that as much as I do, because I just think that's just a fantastic kind of peek behind the veil of the creative process. What would you like listeners to know in terms of, even though we can't predict the future, what you'd hope to work on and where they can find you, where they can support you?
My last record came out in 2017, and it's called A Covey. I'm extremely proud of it, and so I would say start there. But also, I'm on social media, Instagram, Twitter. That's about it, actually. But most of all, most importantly, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/ZolaJesus. And I've been posting demos for my new record. I post, original songs like the Kali Yuga Project. Anything related to what I do, I usually put up there. And there's just a plethora of stuff. So I've been trying to keep busy against the odds, but when I do keep busy, it's usually through Patreon, because I really just rely on that support. And so I want to keep that community fertile and feeling like that's the landing page and the landing spot for where you can find my stuff right now.
As a patron of yours, I absolutely love the content, because it is, especially in this time during the pandemic, seeing how you embrace and share that sonic diary is absolutely, it's invigorating, frankly. It's really, really balming. It's mollifying. It's just very nice. When it comes to being an artist, being a musician, being a creator, what do you think are some of the biggest things that people on the outside, civilians, so to speak, don't understand about what you do every day and, engaging? Or asked another way, what are 2 or 3 things that you wish people understood more?
Aw, that's a sweet question. Thank you. I think there's a energy right now that's very critical of art. And because there is that consumerist, take it or leave it, buy it, dump it mindset. It's really easy to treat art that way. And that's really dangerous for artists' mental health, because we survive by having open nerves. Like, my entire sort of muscle of being a musician, most of it has to do with just being incredibly vulnerable, because that is how I can be sensitive enough to understand myself and the world and really take things in. And yeah, I'm just super, super sensitive. And I feel like I rely on that sensitivity and that openness and vulnerability to feed my work. And I think that that is what makes it, helpful for people. But the antagonism or treating the art or the artist as a commodity makes us feel like we can't be vulnerable, because when you're vulnerable, you're really open to all of that stuff. You're open to all the negativity and the criticism and the hatred. It's really easy to feel self-hatred too as an artist. So I think just being kind to artists and understand that it's an incredibly vulnerable experience. You're putting yourself out there day after day. On tour, I can't explain to you how humiliating it can be to be on stage and to feel like you're out of control, you're open to failure. I've failed on stage so miserably. I've cried on stage. I mean, I've just gone through the gamut because, again, like I said, I'm very sensitive and this is hard work emotionally. So, just be kind to your local artist. That's all I can ask.
That is incredibly helpful and just valuable wisdom. And I cannot thank you enough. Creator, artist, musician, producer, singer, songwriter, Nika Danilova, aka Zola Jesus. Nika, thank you so much for really taking the time and sharing your wisdom with the listeners. It's such an honor and such a privilege. Thank you for stopping by today.
Oh, well, thank you for creating a community and creating an open channel that is so just deeply felt. And I don't know, it's just really good. It's good.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Nika as much as I did. Nika is the real deal, and it is such an honor to hear her open up about things like vulnerability as an artist, also about how she engages with even the most intense of emotions and crafts these feelings into art and music. I also, of course, very much appreciated Nika sharing about her own listener support on Patreon, especially in these times, but during any time, which to each and every one of you, yes, you, thank you for your support of Glitch Bottle or Zola Jesus and any other creators that you want to support. Your listener questions, by the way, are always the very best, and they take conversations into new and interesting directions. And if you have not seen your reserved seat on the Glitch Bottle Caravan yet, you can always get exclusive content by supporting Glitch Bottle on Patreon, and you can always subscribe to Glitch Bottle on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher Radio. As always, this is Alexander F. reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.